Well, the show is called Walking the Cat Back, and that comes from a statement by Peter Sheldal. He used that term, walking the cat back, which is apparently a term from espionage. And it means you've got the answer, but now what were the questions that led up to that answer? And he used that as an analogy for how he looks at paintings, because he says, well, the paintings are the answer. What were the questions the painter was asking? But I wanted to have that title to put the focus on the viewer of this particular show so that they begin to ask themselves those kinds of questions. Of course, Sheldal is very cute about it. He says that once you do that walk back, you come to a point of irreducible mystery. So what do we know? And I mean, it is an epistemological question. How do we know what we know? And these paintings, for me, work on all those three levels: the epistemological, the ontological, and the cosmological. The cosmological being, the question of where do we come from? And then, of course, the ontological question is the question of who are we as people, and gets more deeply into the question of being. And painting is one way of exploring your being in the world. When I was talking about ontology and the question of being, where do we come from, and cosmology, well, when I finished Algonquin 1, the first word that came to my mind was the word Algonquin. And I wondered why that particular word should come out of the entire field of language at that particular moment. It's telling me something. And so I did a little bit of research and discovered that, well, it is very much connected to my family history and to my roots as a person in the world, because our cottage north of Montreal, it turns out, is on the very northeast corner of Algonquin territory, which is still to this day unceded territory. And it seemed to me important that there was this link between all those peoples on this earth that preceded my being here, preceded my family's being here, entering into the paintings. And in some way, I'm accompanying all of that on its journey through these paintings. And you feel that you are engaged with something deep in your own history. All of these things are actually attendant to our being in the world. We're not here as these innocent and neutral ciphers without predecessors, without responsibilities within our own lives, and without repercussions in the future. The winter poems, yes, the winter season is very much dominant in these paintings. And that is a kind of a palette and tonality and almost monochromatic painting that comes from that experience of growing up in Montreal. So the other level on which these paintings work for me, or that I'm exploring, is of course the sheer business of painting per se. And how does one make a mark and a series of marks or gestures, employ pigments in order to create a structure that holds on this rectangular surface. So looking at these paintings closely is, for me, something that I would like to invite people to do. And one of the things that paintings like these can afford a person who's viewing them is simply the pleasure of looking at how a painting is made. And then this one up here, and I love the way the palm makes a particular kind of print. Stanza in Italian means room, but it's also a word that is used in poetry to indicate a grouping of lines. And so for me, these pieces on paper are far more casual groupings of lines rather than the more investigative pieces on the larger canvases in the larger series. So there's a more lightness of spirit and touch in them. Painting is one way of exploring your being in the world and how you apprehend the world and how you return that world to others who may be able to share it with you, who may be able to apprehend it, not necessarily the same way in which you apprehend it, but in their own way.